Hey, everybody. I am so excited to have as today's guest on the FranFaith Anchored in Purpose podcast. I am just thrilled to have Dr. John Hayes. Dr. Hayes not only has a distinguished career in education and is the director of the Titus Center for Franchising at Palm Beach Atlantic University, but Dr. Hayes has an amazing career in franchising as well, a long storied career. And so I'm thrilled to have you as our guest today. If you don't mind, I don't know, do you mind if I call you John?
Oh, you can call me John, right?
I know it's Dr. Hayes,
Yeah, well,
but
you hear that a lot because you're in the classroom, but
it's right, right. And
on campus.
this podcast is kind of informal, and
Yeah,
we
sure.
know you're a man of faith and a man of love, and so that's great that we can call you John. So everybody, meet Dr. John Hayes.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, Todd, to be on here with you and to talk about faith and franchising and the combination and to talk about education and franchising. So, looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, and I should add that when we started talking about FranFaith and the movement and bringing faith, kind of integrity and culture into our businesses and into our franchise businesses, and as we started a movement and a community there, Dr. Hayes was absolutely just one of the first ones to jump up and help and say, "Hey, I want to be a co-founder, and we're all in on this." And so we thank you for that too, for your leadership
Yeah, sure. My
yeah.
pleasure.
So I guess the first question right off the bat is you've had this wonderful career in education, which, makes me a little bit jealous. I went and got my master's and my MBA in finance and would have always loved to have taught, but never really went further in education. Here, how does somebody have and I guess we just have to understand your background a little bit, but how do you
Yeah,
have such a successful career in franchising and then also have such a successful career in education?
yeah.
How did that
God.
come about?
God's plan. So no one would have ever said to me, I would have never said, I want to grow up and be in franchising. Or parents, when I finally got to franchising and I was about 29 years old, and they said, we have no clue what you're talking about or what you're doing. Why are you no longer a professor at Temple University?
So you were a professor at Temple first
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
came
So
over. Oh, okay. So I didn't realize
my
that.
plan was to be a newspaper writer. And thank God that wasn't God's plan because I don't have, wouldn't have anybody to write for today. No audiences there with newspapers. But that was my plan. I studied journalism, bachelor's and master's, and went off to work for magazines and newspapers and maybe write books. And along the way, Kent State, where I got my first two degrees, said, if you would teach for us, you could teach in the evenings and you'd have all day to write. I thought, wow, that was a pretty good deal. You don't make much as a teacher, but it was enough. And we were married already, young. I was married at 21. My wife was 19. We took took that opportunity. But the writing wasn't coming along as fast as I would have liked. I was writing for Writer's Digest, not yet Reader's Digest, but I would write for Reader's Digest. But I would write for a lot of popular and a lot of Horse of Course magazine, where you got $85 for an article. And it was fun, and I was writing for newspapers as well, but mostly I was teaching. And then Temple University got me at a conference, a journalism conference, and invited me to come and head their magazine writing program. So we left Ohio from Kent State, and I had no intention of having a lifetime in education. It wasn't part of my plan. And again, teachers and parents and my schoolmates would probably still laugh that I would be in education because I was in the lower part of my class, I'm sure. But God's plan is entirely different. And, we're surprised by it constantly. So I went over to Temple and they said, well, you can get your PhD here and it's a benefit. We pay for it. And if you don't get a PhD, you you'll only have 7 years here. You have 7 years to get a PhD, then you don't have a job anymore. We can't employ you. You need to have a doctorate. And that's standard in academia if you
Yeah.
want to be in the professional ranks. and you want to be an academically qualified professor in AACSB, you need to have a PhD and you need to do research. So I thought, well, I'm going to get the James Michener, who I wrote his biography for my doctoral dissertation, had said to me, anytime you can get free education, you take free education. Don't pass that up. And so I did. In the path of that, I still wasn't making any money. I was making $12,500 a year as an assistant professor in communications and the head of the magazine writing program. And this was late 1970s. And I decided that I would write books for people, because if you're in business and you don't have a book, the media pay no attention to you. If you want media to pay attention, they want to know you're an expert, and they only know that you're an expert because you're a book author. That's how they know you're an expert. So I had 3 books right out of the chute that came my way, and one of them was a guy who said he was a franchisor. I had no clue, and this is pre-internet, so I couldn't jump on Google. I had to pull my dictionary down and try to spell franchisor, find out what is he talking about.
See what this franchising mess is, huh?
And I couldn't find a franchisor. I didn't know to look for franchise. I just didn't know anything about it. I wasn't in business. My family wasn't in business. I knew there was a McDonald's. I knew it was a franchise, but I never thought more about it than that. And so then I just finally said to him, "What do you do?" And he said, "Well, I'm in cooperative direct mail advertising." And again, I was lost. That's in communications, but he was a coupon producer. He was Trimark. He was the 13th of 16 missionary kids, and started his business in the 3 Persons of God and called it Trimark.
Yeah. Okay.
And so he said, I sell franchises to people for $10,000, and I teach them, give them a territory, and we teach them how to go door to door and sell coupon packages. It cost $10,000. And I thought, and this is, they did all of this by a piece of paper, and you put the logo and you send the logo, and you put the logo here and do this there and put his name over here and the hours of operation.
Yeah.
And making a coupon. And then you'd mail that to Wilmington, Delaware, the headquarters of the franchisor, and they do all the production.
They would produce the coupon book.
The envelopes, the stamps, and 30,000 envelopes with 20 coupons in it would go out in your territory. And I did.
They essentially made, a little old school probably, they made their markup on producing that, and then there was no royalty or anything.
Exactly.
So you had a business and a kit kind of thing.
That's what they did. Okay. And it was great. I spoke to a couple of their top franchisees, one who had a journalism degree like I did, and he told me I make more than $100,000. I couldn't imagine making $100,000 and being a college professor. And he said, there's no reason why you couldn't do what I do. You could buy a franchise and operate it. But that was not my calling. My calling was to write and teach, and in this case about franchising. And so I wrote Franchising: The Inside Story. And that was the first book published about franchising, about how to go buy a franchise. And the intention was to make Mr. Kinch, the franchisor, the expert. His name was on the book, but he invited me to have my name on the book, which again, I didn't normally do that. I was the ghostwriter. But part of God's plan, again, was my name would go on that book. He, under the lights of television interviews, he would shrink. He couldn't do it. He got nervous. And so all the media was left to me. I was doing 3 radio shows, phoners, and back in those days, it didn't matter where you were, as long as you had a landline. And I'm in Philadelphia, and I'm connected with Boston radio. Then I'm 10 minutes later with LA radio, live in the morning, drive time, talking about, hey, we're interviewing the world's authority on franchising.
Yeah, how about that? You became an expert.
And I would laugh because I had spent 6 months writing that book, interviewing 100 people like you, for example. IFA would introduce me to board members and to lawyers, and they in turn would introduce me to franchisees and to marketing experts. And so I interviewed 100 people, wrote the book, but I was no expert. I never worked for a franchise company. I didn't know what it was all about, but the media said that I was. And so you might have heard me on radio in Tampa, and then you say, I got to call this guy. And you'd call and say, well, I'm a franchisor, and I'm in the business of, I'm in a maid service business, and I need an operations manual written. Could you do that? Sure, I could do that. I didn't know what an operations manual was, but if it was writing, I could do it. Could you write a newsletter for our franchisees every month? Yeah, I can do that. Could you come and speak to our convention and tell our franchisees how to get more media exposure? Sure, I can do that. And one day I was playing cards, and my friend, we were talking about the next week coming up. I said, I got to fly here. And then at the end of the week, I'm flying there. I got to do this, got to do that. And he said, you have a business. And I said, no, I don't have a business. I just have a bunch of projects that I'm doing that came from this book. And it's all about franchising. And everybody'd say, what is that? So that's how it all got started. Totally God's plan for my life. Totally. I did not open any franchise doors. I
Wow.
didn't open the door to education. Kent
Well,
State came to
somewhere in
me.
that journey, I know. So clearly, you must have left Temple at some
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
But then somewhere in that journey, I know you met Fred DeLuca
Yes.
and became friends with Fred. And as I recall, you co-wrote a book.
I wrote his book, Start Small, Finish Big.
Yeah,
And that was my biggest book because Warner Books was our publisher. They loved the idea of Subway and Fred. And we had a 6-figure advance on that book, which was fantastic for me. Yeah. So I spent a lot of time with Fred,
yeah,
a couple of years writing that book because, well, Fred's schedule was difficult, challenging, but also Fred wanted everything just perfectly in the book, which no problem with that at all, but it took more time. And Fred didn't have a lot to say. It was 15 lessons from the co-founder of Subway. And that was an experience all of its own. I said, okay, Fred, let's start out. Let's write chapter 1. Your lesson is never run out of money. And I said, and we were in different places. I was on my, we were doing, it wasn't Zoom, it was whatever was before Zoom. And I'm not even sure we were looking at each other. I think it was just a phone interview. Yeah, it was just a conference call. And I said, so tell me about that. And he said, well, never run out of money. I said, yeah, I got that. That's the title of the chapter. And I need about 2,500 words for the chapter. And he said, well, you ever play Monopoly? And I said, yeah, I play. What happens when you run out of money? I said, well, you're out of the game. And he said, yep, that's what happens. So never run out of money. I said, okay, that's about 50 words, Fred. And it turned out that on every topic, that's about as much as Fred had to say.
yeah.
So I had to come
Well,
up with a whole,
it's interesting. I was in the Blimpie business in the 90s, and so we were competing against Subway. But because of the IFA involvement, I had met Fred a number of times and
yeah,
became friendly with him and had
yeah.
dinner with him one night. In fact, actually, a signed copy of that book from Fred is a cherished possession. I guess I
Yeah,
didn't realize that you had co-wrote. I think I did. I think I did remember that I saw your
yeah,
name on that book because I
yeah.
think you actually got authorship there.
Yes, I did.
But anyway, he was always such a humble man. And so I think of the few words, he had such great wisdom in any conversation I ever had with him. But it's his humility that actually probably made him few words.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
I traveled all over with him internationally as well, as I used to do these trade missions for the IFA, and people like Fred who wanted to sell their master franchises to France or Spain or wherever would go on these trade missions, and I would go to promote franchising and meet with the media. So I got to know Fred really well traveling with him, and I knew he had a lot of good things to say. So we always talked about writing a book someday, but I had done Don Dwyer's book before Fred. I did David Sandler's book from Sandler Sales Training before Fred. And finally, he said, we need to get around to doing a book. And we did. And happy that we were able to do that.
yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great. So then it did seem that you pivoted and actually jumped more into franchising, into franchise roles, as I recall. Because I think I want to say when I was CEO of Mr. Handyman, it seemed like you were head of housemasters. And it's funny because a lot of our guys across the country would do handyman work in,
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of homes
Yeah.
everywhere. And we
Yeah.
built a wonderful company today, just an incredible company. But I remember being a little bit jealous of you because I thought, wow, if we could do that handyman work inside a home that we were owning and flipping, that's where the
Yeah.
real money is made.
Yeah, that would have been a good hookup. And it was called Homevestors was
Home
the
investors.
company, and everybody knows it as We Buy Ugly Houses.
Yeah.
And it was based in Dallas, Texas. And yes, I left academia. When I got my PhD in 85, I said to Temple, I belong in the classroom. I know that's where God wants me to be, but I can't afford to be in the classroom. It pays no money. Even with a PhD, they said, well, we're going to pay you $18,000 a year. And I thought, wow, that's really great. But I'm already doing $100,000 a year with all these little projects that I have related to franchising. So I said, I'm going to go on and build my business, and I'll come back to teaching when I can afford to teach. And that's exactly how that happened. And that was my plan, which must have been God's plan as well. But along the way, I did not know that I would become a franchisee. I bought franchises with a partner, and one of the best that I bought was We Buy Ugly Houses. And I got that in a barter because the franchisor, Ken D'Angelo, great man in Dallas, Texas, said, I need all this work done. And I said, well, it's about 80 some $1,000s. And he said, well, I don't have any money. Well, I'm never surprised by that because the franchisors, founders of companies, they
Right.
never had any money. And he
Right.
had sold about 50 franchises at that time. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, I have never done this. Well, I did do it one other time. It didn't work out. And that's why I didn't like to say, let me have a franchise because I didn't want to operate it. But I said to him, if give me a franchise, which sold for 25,000 at the time, but you needed $5,000 a month to pay for the billboard advertising, and not only give me a franchise, give me $5,000 a month for at least 6 months and find me an operating partner who I can bring in to run the franchise because I'm not going to do that. I'm busy. I'll be rewriting your operations and training program. So all that happened beautifully. And about 5 years into our relationship, unfortunately, Ken got bile duct cancer, and
Oh,
Ken was gone in about 3 months' time. And before that, I visited him one day in the hospital where he knew he was dying. And he said, my family and I have decided that you have to succeed me as the CEO and chairman of the board of Homevestors. By this time, there were 230 franchisees. And I said, I can't do that, Ken. I don't know. I don't know anything about real estate. And he said, you know about franchising. It's not about real estate. And we trust you. And then I started thinking. I mean, I didn't even call my wife. We were in his hospital room where he said, I'm not going to survive this. And I was one of his closest friends by this time. And I realized you don't tell a dying man no. So I said yes. That night I said, I'll go in tomorrow. You call the CFO who is on the board and let him know that I'm coming in and that I'm going to have a meeting with the company. And I won't be the CEO. I'll be the president. You're going to remain the CEO because you can come back from this. He was working with the Mayo Clinic at that time, but there was no coming back from bile duct cancer. And so that's how I became a franchisor, one of the few people to be a supplier, a franchisee, and a franchisor.
right.
And wow, I had a great run with that until the Great Recession, starting in when they took subprime lending out of the market in the summer of 2007. Maybe a smarter guy, maybe a guy who knew much more about real estate. And I had two of those people on my board of directors, but
Sure.
neither one of them knew when they took subprime out of the market, that was the decline, the beginning of the end for Homevestors. We were loaning money to all of our franchisees to be able to go buy those houses. We had a $50 million line that we would turn 3.5 times a year. And that money was out there and not coming back. And so we were in default with the bank. We were headed toward a bankruptcy. And lo and behold, Mr. DeLuca had already invested about $3 million with us because he liked me and I liked him and he liked the idea. He'd always say, I got a lot of money, John. I said, you don't have to remind me, Fred. I read that you're like the 78th wealthiest man on the Forbes list. I know you got a lot of money. And he said, well, I like to put it places that it can make good multiples. I don't just want 8-10%. I said, okay. So I hooked him up with our CFO and he invested in our fund where we were loaning his money. And then I called him and I said, look, this is not looking good. And in 2008, he bought the company, fortunately, and saved us in that regard. And I said to him, I'm not going to work for you very long because I've written a book with you and I know your personality and I'm not going to work for you. And he said, no, I understood, but stay for a while. And I did. And I said, it's time for me to go back to academia. And so I left Homevestors then, 2009, and thought, well, I'm going to go. I was living in Dallas. I'll go to the University of North Texas. I'll go to the University of Dallas, where I'd been an adjunct. I'll go to Baylor down in Waco, where the Dwyer Group, now Neighborly, was based. But none of that panned out. One day I got this call out of the blue. Again, this was not my plan. Out of the blue, a call from Gulf University for science and technology. And I thought, Mississippi or Florida? And I don't want to go to either state. I don't want to live in either place. No, it was Kuwait. What? Kuwait? I didn't
Yeah,
apply for a
a
job in
different
Kuwait.
Gulf.
My wife's not going to go to Kuwait. And they said, your wife will love Kuwait. She can dress here the way she does in America. We love Americans. You don't pay any taxes in Kuwait. We don't track how much you make, so you don't have to tell anybody if you don't want to. But I did. I told you, I had business interests in the United States. So I did claim my income. 7 years in Kuwait, teaching franchising, marketing, communications, traveling all over the Middle East, teaching in Abu Dhabi at conferences and traveling to India and Morocco. And wow, it was just meeting more franchise people.
What an adventure.
Yeah.
Well, it's amazing, hearing your story. You must be the most drafted person in franchising where you're just constantly drafted into a new role that you weren't looking for. And so I can't help but think when I hear your story, God is all over that. It's just
Yeah.
so unusual to have doors open for you and be drafted into a different role. I mean, I guess it begs the question. I'd love to hear about your faith. I mean, when did you become, I'm presuming we've talked in the past, I'm presuming you're a Christian, and when did you become a Christian? And then,
so I was born into an Italian Irish family. My mother was one of nine, 100% Italian. My father was Irish German, one of nine, in a beautiful little city in northeastern Ohio, small town, 20,000 people. Went to the Catholic school for 12 years, was going to be a priest. The seminary rejected me. That wasn't God's plan for me to be a priest. And I always laugh, and I laugh with God and say, now we got the first American Pope. Could have been me. I was trying to get out there. I wasn't just going to be a parish priest. I was going to write and speak, and I was going to be doing something, more. Not that there's anything wrong with being a parish priest, but I got rejected. The seminary sent me home. So, and then I decided, well, I guess and Sister Judith Ann, looking over my shoulder when I was in the ninth grade, said, "You're not smart enough." Yeah, I think she used the word stupid. I've got to go back and look at I'm going to write a memoir, and I remember her saying, "You're too stupid to get Latin. You could never be a priest." Well, within a year, Vatican II happened. Within 3 years, Vatican II happened, and the mass went to English. So I had to say, well, sister, you were wrong. Priests don't need to have Latin anymore.
well, not only was she wrong on you not getting Latin,
Yeah.
but she was wrong on
Yeah.
any,
Yeah, she was a
such a
tough one.
brilliant guy. I mean, I don't know
Well,
what
thank you.
sister's doing today, but
Yeah. Well, she's deceased, as is Sister Mary Edward, who was another one who gave me a hard time. I got into her typing class, and she said, boys don't take typing. Boys go to college. Girls take typing. Boys have to take chemistry and physics. I don't even know how to spell those words, let alone take the class. And I stuck in typing because I wanted to be a writer.
lighter,
But
yeah.
she gave me, all the girls had Selectric typewriters, and she gave me a Royal standard typewriter. And that wasn't like it was bad enough. No letters on the keys. All of the keys were black. So
Because they were
she,
just so worn? They
no,
were
they
worn, you
didn't
couldn't see them
exist.
anymore?
This was a special typewriter and she did me the greatest favor because I can fly across a keyboard. I don't have to look. I can watch you and interview you. And I would do this all my life. And people would say, are you actually typing what I'm saying because you're not looking at the key? Well, I don't look at the keyboard. What good would it do me? There were no letters on the keys when I learned how to type. And I'm very proud that I beat the girls on their Selectrics twice. I have the certificates 2 years that I beat the girls on my Royal typewriter. At any rate, that was part of God's plan for me as well. I just didn't know how all that was going to fit in. So I am a cradle Catholic and was very fortunate. And my grandmother, my Italian grandmother, was charismatic, always with the Bible, always with a rosary every day, and maybe several times a day. But I know at 12 o'clock, because I was there many, many times, she would go get on her knees on the third floor and pray. And so I knew the importance of God in our lives and the importance of prayer. And my life was just, I thought everybody was like that. I didn't know that that wasn't the case. So I always, and then as I matured and got older and I was making plans, applying for this internship that I didn't get, my mother was very upset that I didn't get this internship because we didn't have money. My parents said, we don't know how you're going to get to college because we don't have the money. Well, I got a job, worked during the day, and I went to college for the first 2 years at night, and I
Yeah.
paid for that. And then my fourth year, Kent State, just the chairman of the board who I worked for, he owned the local newspaper. When I got married, he said, I'm going to give you a 50-cent raise and I'm paying for your senior year of college. And then Kent State paid for my master's degree and Temple University paid for my PhD. None of this was in my plan. Going to Kuwait, like a lady said to me in Dallas, is that in West Texas? That's a little further than West Texas. But why are you going there? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah,
There's an
right. They both
opportunity.
have oil, but they are
Yeah,
far apart.
exactly. Yeah. And stayed there in Kuwait for 7 years until again got a text. Ray Titus, my client, West Palm Beach, says I gave this little Christian university $1.5 million to open a center to teach college students about franchising. The president said they need a PhD and somebody who knows how to teach franchising. I said, Ray said, he told him he's in Kuwait. We just got to get him to come home. And that's how I came to Florida and how I came to Palm Beach Atlantic and created the Titus Center. Again, this I didn't apply for any of it. And I say to my students, just trust in God's plan. God has a plan for each one of us.
Yeah.
You have to trust. And when the door opens, God expects you to walk through it. The
Yeah.
door might slam in your face, or you might realize it's a window, not a door, and you fall out the window. This
Yeah.
has
And
happened to me.
when I look back on my life, or when I talk to my kids, or when I speak to kids or younger people and students, I do say a similar message. And the tough thing that I often had to deal with was when I wanted something and really thought it was part of what I wanted or was heading in the direction, and then God closed that door. And to trust God still when we're so disappointed or so frustrated or working through a tough situation. And that was always really difficult for me. And I don't know if you share that too a little bit, but
Yeah, still is. I can't understand it. Something that I thought was so right for me. I've had so many of those where things that I applied for, I didn't get.
yeah,
The things that God wanted me to do, He opened the doors, and but great disappointment at times when things don't work out. And then I remember I say, this just isn't God's plan for
yeah,
me.
yeah,
I've lost two children out of my three children. That wasn't my plan. My daughter was 34. My son was about 34. Uh, How did that happen? I was married almost 50 years. My wife died of cancer. Why? How do these things happen? And what do you do? And if you don't have faith, people will say to me, you've lost two kids and a wife, and you still smile. Yeah, it's not that the pain isn't constantly there.
Yeah,
These deaths have occurred in the last 10 years. All three of them occurred in the last 10 years. That
yeah,
pain is always there. And it takes a TV show to bring something back to the surface. And I go back to faith and say, without that, I wouldn't smile. And without that, I'd be more desperate. Now, in this world that we live in, that is declining in morals and values, and you look at young people, and I look at my four grandchildren, and you worry about what kind of world are they getting?
sure.
We're living in the worst kind of environment. People are desperate and scared. And if you don't have faith, you may succumb to the corrupt environment that we live in. But with faith, you'll know that God has a plan. This is all part of God's plan. And will we have a revival? Where will we bringing FranFaith together? Part of God's plan that you would be the one to do it. And franchising has always been, for many, many years, having a prayer breakfast at the IFA convention. That was laughed at in the very beginning. I was there in the very beginning. I was personally working with the then president of the International Franchise Association, who was not Christian and who was not a believer at all. And when they requested, let's have a prayer breakfast at IFA, he laughed and he said quietly to me, this will just let them think that they're creating something that's never going to happen. This is a business environment. There's no place for prayer here. And I didn't say anything. I went to the prayer breakfast because I wanted to be involved. And
Right.
in those early years, there were 25 people. And now there are maybe 250 people at a prayer breakfast at the IFA. They, it's all part of, these things are part of God's plan. We're in a declining world right now morally because that's part of God's plan. And there are going to be revivals along the way, and there are going to be people coming together where you wouldn't expect faithful people to come together in a business environment. But
Right.
at the IFA, as you know, you were the host last at the last convention. We are bringing people together in
Yeah.
various ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing how many people that have reached out to us and are quiet believers, and they appreciate the movement and they're joining. It's interesting that we're seeing so many examples of people uh, putting faith and culture into their businesses and into their franchise businesses. And we have a unique opportunity in the United States where we are the envy of the world from a business climate
Yes.
standpoint. And we have that great freedom in this country to be able to still have that freedom of speech within our businesses. In fact, I often say, you know, a lot of the educational institutions have let us down a bit. The health institutions have kind of let us down a bit, especially, you know, they have miraculous breakthroughs, and our doctors and nurses are amazing people with the cost and the expense and all of the whole system, and coming through COVID, you know, it's tough. And we see our religious institutions at times letting us down. And so our school systems letting us down, our government's letting us down. And so business leaders that actually stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. You can make faith a part of your culture and a part of your business. A lot of times when we're with our people or with our teams, we have a very, very simple question. We'll see somebody struggling and we'll say to them, hey, how can I pray for you? And it stops them. They look and then they say, well, gosh, I guess I've been struggling with my marriage or my child, or yeah, you could pray for this. And then we'll say, because the door's open, would you like to pray right now? And then we'll pray with them. And it does a number of things. It says you love them, says you care about them, says this is a different kind of culture. It says that God is still in charge. I'm not going to be able to solve your problem with a raise or with more sales growth or less work, but I can pray for you and
Yeah.
I can care about you. And so we just have an amazing freedom in this country to be able to do that. And we're going to be doing that more and more and more. So,
Well, we do that at the university as well, which I've been at five. I've taught at five universities, and this is the only Christian university. And I always appreciate that I can go in there and talk about God in my life, and to young Christian students who that resonates with them. And that what a blessing, because you can't do that everywhere. You just wouldn't do that. You wouldn't have a job.
right.
But at Palm Beach Atlantic University, part of our mission is to bring our students closer in line with God and to be aware that God has a purpose for us and a plan for us, but He doesn't tell us. It makes me laugh because I think all the wrong turns I've taken, all the
Yeah.
disappointments that I've had, God, you could have spared me if you just told me the plan.
Right. Yeah. And in my life, I've often noted that God has always shown up, one, and two, he's never shown up late for
Yeah,
me. I think he's missed some, in my opinion, some amazing opportunities to be early and
yeah,
solve and pull my butt out of a jam.
right.
But he's never shown up late.
Yeah, exactly.
But I never quite know how or where he's moving. But I know
Yeah,
he's always moving, and
yeah.
it's amazing how blessed we are for sure. Well, to think that here today I could have been talking to Father John Hayes.
Yeah, no, I would say maybe bishop at least, maybe cardinal.
Cardinal, or yeah, Bishop,
Right.
Cardinal, Pope John Hayes. It could have been any of those, but God had a very different plan, and you have these many years of a wonderful wife and children, and even in the spite of some of the pain, and I know have a wonderful wife now, even. But we've just been so blessed, John, by your testimony and your work, both in franchising and your writing over the years, and your faithful heart following God. You are just such a blessing to us.
Thank you.
We
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
for all that
it's been my pleasure.
today. All right. Thanks, John.